If you're training for a marathon, ultra, or even just pushing a distance, if you don't have a clear carbohydrate fueling strategy, then you are leaving performance on the table. Hi, I'm James Hudson, a sport nutritionist and the guy who helps runners and busy professionals fuel smarter, not harder, so that you don't have to become a slave to restrictive diets. Today, we are diving deep into the role of carbohydrate and endurance training. So what we're going to be covering is how to exactly calculate your needs, the foods that you're going to use to help improve your performance and recovery, how to train your gut, and the biggest fueling mistakes that I see athletes make on race day -1, aka your carb load. Let's get into it. So let's start with the big one. Why do runners need so much carbohydrate? Well, when you run, your body prefers to use glycogen. This is your body's store of carbohydrate. It's efficient, fast, and keeps your brain and muscles running smoothly. Now, if glycogen runs out, you bonk, you hit the wall, your pace suffers. You basically end up walking. You may even feel a little bit lightheaded or dizzy. My experience of this, it feels like someone's just pulled the plug on me. This is also not great for immunity, but we're going to get into that in another video. So, carbs aren't a luxury for endurance athletes. They're a necessity to fuel your performance, especially when you're training for a marathon and your runs are getting up over 60 to 90 minutes plus. Okay, so how much carbohydrate do you actually need? Well, let's try and put this into context. We'll do a light training day. We'll do a moderate training day, and we're going to do a hard training day. Now, I would suggest between 3 and 4 grams per kilogram of body weight carbohydrate on a light, maybe 4 to 6 on a hard, and we're going to go 6 plus, almost up to 10, depending on quite how hard that long run is. But we want to make this, well, really, we want to put it into context, don't we? So let's say you wake up here, maybe you've got a bit of time in the morning, then you go to work, you got some time in the evening here, and then you go to bed here. Zeds. How do we split this intake over your day, and what does that look like in food? If we've got a light day, right, you might be having some sort of mobility session after work. If we're trying to get roughly 3 grams per kilogram body weight, well then if we have breakfast, lunch and dinner, and they're fairly moderate sized meals, but there's an obvious high carbohydrate food comprising that meal, they're going to be roughly 1 gram per kilogram body weight each. So that's roughly 3 grams per kilogram body weight without having to input anything into MyFitnessPal. If this is a little bit more intense, or you're going to have a bit of something where there's some heart rate lifting in there, maybe we have 0.5 or a little small carbohydrate snack just to top you up. If, however, you're looking to lose body weight, we can adjust this down a little bit. This might be a little bit smaller, this might be a little bit smaller. On a moderate day, let's say you've got run club, you're doing 45 minutes to an hour, there's some tempo in there, so this is moderate. How do we fuel that? Well, to get into this range, firstly, we want to have a much bigger refuel. So this is a big carbohydrate meal. So don't skimp on carbohydrates here. It's not just a moderate meal, you're having something where there's obvious carbs in there. We're still going to have our 1 gram per kilogram body weight at lunch, so that moderate size plate, 1 gram here, but now we might want to incorporate a few little high carb snacks too. So they're smaller feedings that are just fairly snacky. So that might be 2 pieces of fruit, for example, small bowl of yogurt with again, bit of granola on top. That way we can get 1.5, 2, 3, 4, 4.5. We're right in that right sort of range. You'd push it up depending on the intensity and the duration of this. On a hard day though, if you're going for your run, let's say it's a 2.5 or 3 hour run, got a 3 hour hard run in there. Well, ideally we want to have some carbohydrate coming in before. I would say if you can have time to get a normal carbohydrate rich meal, but maybe allow 90 minutes for it to digest. We're going to have our breakfast there, that's 1 gram per kilogram. We also want to go big afterwards. We want that 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight. That's the most effective way to refuel muscle glycogen, is to have that number. But then also, that's our refuel meal. We then want to have another meal afterwards. So this is where we then prioritize more whole food after our body has time to unwound a little bit from the intensity of this. So that might be another 1 gram per kilogram. We would then have dinner and maybe a mid-afternoon too. But the key thing on this day, we need to make sure that we fuel our long run. So if you're going to be doing maybe 60, 70, 80 grams of carbohydrate per hour to hopefully practice your race nutrition, well, that's roughly 1 gram per kilogram body weight, right? So you're basically having 3 grams per kilogram body weight in here. 1, 4, 5.2, 6.2, 7.2, 8.2. You can still see how this stacks up. Whether you actually need one in here, I would be guided then off your hunger levels, because actually your body is really smart, and depending on how hard you've pushed here, suddenly you'll feel hungry. But if you put this one in and this one and you fueled aggressively, then what you'll find is that you should get to this period and actually you won't want to eat absolutely everything, which might happen at the moment, because you fueled when your body needs it. That'll make making the right choices in this evening time a lot easier. Now, let's talk food. We're going to use this model and try and make it practical with some high carbohydrate foods that hopefully you like the taste of. So let's talk about what foods you can use to hit these numbers. So I mentioned before, if we've got roughly 1 gram per kilogram body weight, we want some obvious high carbohydrate foods coming in consistently in each of these meals. Breakfast, great options here. Oats, just fantastic. But if you want to have something here maybe with a little bit more sugar, maybe that's a brown flakes meal, go for it. Just because there's some sugar in it doesn't mean you can't have it. You can actually mellow the release of that sugar by ensuring there's some fat and some protein in that meal. So maybe add some yogurt and add some nuts to this just to get the carbohydrate in, but have something a little bit different. Alternatively, a bagel, but there's 40 grams of carbohydrate in that, so maybe you need a banana and some peanut butter in it to get it into the right sort of range. Alternatively, have a bagel with some eggs, and then also have a couple of portions of fruit afterwards, just to top you up. Lunch meals, we're looking for variety again, so if you're used to having salads, can we add some different whole grains? Could we add some wild rice? Could we add some spelt, some freekeh, some couscous, some quinoa? Get excited about ways and high carbohydrate foods to add into your diet. Evening meals, maybe it's a wrap, maybe it's some bread with the soup that you're having, maybe it's potatoes in all its shapes, varieties and different forms. Not just sweet potato, but normal potatoes are good too. Pasta, noodles, also fantastic. Then these little snacks, fruit is just a fantastic way of getting that carbohydrate in. If you do have it while you're completely sedentary, potentially have it with a high fiber food like some nuts or even some cheese, just to mellow the intake of that carbohydrate. These little pre-fuels, these are the ones that you might have which are a little bit more sugary. If you're having something immediately before, that's when the sweeter options are great. And then also during. If you're going to be fueling during, that's when we just want sugar. So in any of its forms, that could be dried fruit, it could be gels, it could be Haribo. Getting something in, but knowing your numbers is the key thing here. This one is when potentially having some liquid carbohydrate is good, because then you're getting carbs in when you need it in a form that's really easy to digest, and you're also hydrating. Then we're moving back to whole foods with your favorite selection of carbohydrate rich foods there. Something to mention is that if you've got a really hard or moderate hard session and you normally struggle with tummy trouble, consider what you're having in the couple of meals before. So maybe instead of having something that's really high fiber like your veggie sticks and hummus here because you're being healthy, maybe we swap this out and we have 4 or 5 rice cakes. Whoa. Something that's just carbohydrate, not particularly nutrient dense, but basically you're just getting that carbs in. It's gonna really sit well in your stomach and you're gonna be able to feel fantastic in there. Obviously afterwards, that's when we then focus on high fiber and real high quality carbohydrates. Okay, so I'm gonna rub this out and now we're gonna focus on race day fueling, because race day fueling doesn't just happen on race day, it's something that you're gonna be practicing on most of your long runs. Race day fueling. Okay, you want to be aiming for between 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour for runs of 90 minutes plus. If, however, you are a trained athlete, then actually we might want to be going between 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. So let's say you've got a 2-hour training run and you want to really practice your race day strategy. 2 hours at say 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour, you need 120 grams. Now, this is where you might look for some gels potentially because they're high sugar. Let's say you went with some 30 gram of carbohydrate gels. How would you fuel with that? So I would recommend having one 2 minutes before, so minus 2 minutes. Then if you have one on 30 minutes, then you have one on 60 minutes and one on 90 minutes. You'll have had 1, 2, 3, 4 lots of 30. You'll have had 120 grams of carbohydrate. Give that one a go. Now it's also common to get 40 gram servings of gels. If I was going to be using those to get 120 grams over my 2-hour run, I would also have it 2 minutes before. I'll then have it at 40 minutes and 80 minutes, so an hour and 20. That is then going to fuel you really well throughout your whole run. Obviously, this works really nicely for 2 hours, but you can use this same strategy for 3 hours or even 4 hours. You would just double it for 4 hours. I would recommend having a strategy where you know exactly how much carbohydrate is coming in and when you're gonna have it. That will allow for consistent energy, and if you've practiced that during your long runs, it's not gonna be a surprise to your gut on race day. The next thing I want to cover is gut training. Gut training, what does that mean? It means training your gut to digest and metabolize an increasing amount of carbohydrate when your gut is under stress, so when you're running. Why is it under stress? Well, basically there's less blood flow in it because all your blood is in your working muscles, allowing you to run fast. So how do we train your gut? Well, the first thing we want to do, gradually increase the amount of carbohydrate that you're going to be consuming in training. So I just mentioned there that you might want to be going for 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour on your next 2-hour run. But if you've never fueled with carbohydrate before, then maybe you try 30 grams of carbohydrate per hour on your next long run. Then if that feels good and you had a bit more energy than normal, then in the next week, you try 40 grams of carbohydrate per hour, then 50, then 60, and you build slowly until you get to the point where you're able to run nice and fast, maybe a bit faster than normal, and you also have no issues with your tummy. Now, it doesn't just have to be gels that you're using. You can increase that number by also adding sports drinks. So maybe if you were going 1 week and you're having a little bit more the next, maybe you also have, instead of just plain water in your hydration bottle, you've also got a sports drink. That could be adding an extra 20 grams of carbohydrate, which over the course of a 2-hour run would be an extra 10 grams per hour and would give you that little lift. Using liquid carbs there is going to be really helpful because it's super easy and light. There's no extra fiber and fat coming in because it's just sugar. So when training your gut, you're increasing gradually, you're starting small, and then also you're going to make sure that there's a variety of different sugars in there. Now, I wouldn't overthink this because if you're using sports products, most of the time there are a mix of glucose and fructose, but it's something to think about that if you're looking to have more than 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour, you will struggle with tummy trouble if you're just having glucose. You do need a mix then. I'm just going to say this point again because I think it's really important. Do practice your timings. It's good to have a pattern and a structure that you can follow because then on race day, you don't even have to think about your nutrition. It's just something which is automatic and you know will fuel you all the way to the end. Carb loading and race week mistakes. So let's bust a few common myths here. Carb loading isn't just a massive bowl of pasta the night before a race. The days of those big pasta parties have come and gone. It's now much more efficient, much smarter, and it's probably going to feel a lot easier to gradually get your carbohydrate in over lots of meals over the 24 and then 48 hours prior to your race. Myth number 2, you need to eat all healthy food. Well, actually, if you eat loads and loads of high fiber vegetables on the day before your race, it's just gonna fill up your gut with undigested food. That's gonna be a big trigger for lower body GI issues on your run. So I would actually avoid a lot of high fiber, healthy food the day before. Strip it back and you're gonna go low fiber. You'll feel lighter on your feet and have less risk of those GI issues. Finally, trying new foods. Maybe you've booked into a marathon in another country and you're quite excited to try the local cuisine. I would avoid this at all costs. Maybe even take food with you so that you know exactly what you're having, that you're hitting your right carb numbers, and then enjoy the cuisine after your run. So how do I recommend you do a carb load? Start from 48 hours out. Race day -2, I want you to start increasing the amount of high carbohydrate foods that you have in all of your main meals. So remember back to the start when you're having between 4 to 6 or 6 to 8 grams per kilogram body weight, depending on the intensity of the day. We want to be looking to have around 6 grams per kilogram or more on this day. You can achieve that by having those obvious high carbohydrate foods and also some high carbohydrate snack. My tip on this day is to also include some high carbohydrate drinks, as that will make it easier for you to get from 4 to maybe 5 or 6, or even from 5 or 6 to 7 or 8. Then race day -1, this is when you then reduce down the amount of fiber. We're aiming for really easy to digest carbohydrates. I typically go for something like Rice Krispies at breakfast, but instead of having a normal bowl, have 2 or even 3 big bowls of those. Add some dried fruit, again, just make it easy to get the carbohydrates in. Add sports drinks or fruit juice. Then rice-based dishes for lunches and dinners, something that you can rinse and repeat that you know is getting in ample carbohydrate. Maybe a smoothie between those so there's more liquid carbs, keeping it easy. And also, if you like a few sweets, adding those in will just help top up your carb totals without adding any additional fiber. My final go-to on race day -1 is something like a rice pudding because it just slides down. So if you're actually not feeling that hungry, but you want to top up your carb intake, it's a really neat way of just getting in that extra hit of carbohydrate. Remember, your carb load is all about setting yourself up for success. So don't eat to the point where you're feeling crazy bloated because then you're going to wake up feeling a bit sluggish. Make sure you are listening to your body, but by choosing high carb options that are also lower in fiber, you'll be able to get up to that carb total without feeling really, really full. So if you want to run strong, feel mentally sharp and finish with confidence, You need to have a carb strategy that works with your training, not against it. So hit like and subscribe, and if you're curious about what a proper carb load looks like before a race, then feel free to watch my video, 640 grams of carbohydrate in one day. I'll see you in the next one.